Picture this. You're in a packed airport terminal, rushing to catch your flight. You hit the currency exchange counter, hand over a crisp US dollar bill. It turns into a fat stack of Japanese yen, enough for a fancy sushi dinner. But swap the same dollar for Venezuelan bolivars? You get a sad pile of paper that barely buys a candy bar. Same paper, same ink, same government promise stamped on it. One currency grabs you a meal. Another might snag you a city block if you're lucky. We've got dollars, yen, rupees, bolivars, all called money, all printed by governments. Yet their value? Worlds apart. Here's the wild part. If governments just make the stuff, why isn't all money equal? And the real kicker, who actually decides what your money's worth? This is Professor of Money, a place where money moves nation, power bends truth, and history hides its darkest secret. For most of human history, money was dead simple. Gold, silver, even salt. Stuff you could hold in your hand, feel its weight. If two coins tipped the scales the same, they were worth the same, no matter where you were on Earth. But today, money just floats. Our dollar isn't gold anymore. A euro? No silver. A yen? Not backed by any metal you can touch. It's all held up by belief. Pure trust. Back in 1944, right after the world tore itself apart in war, world leaders sat down and basically reinvented money. That powwow, the Bretton Woods Conference. From then on, it wasn't about heft or shine. It was about faith in the system. And trust? Unlike gold, it's never spread evenly. Some have it in spades. Others, not so much. Think of currency as something more than just paper or pixels. Think of it as a reputation score. When a country has a strong currency, what they really have is a rock-solid reputation. When it's weak, that reputation is fragile, like glass. See, every time you hold a banknote, you're looking at the answer to three silent questions. Questions that every investor, every bank, and every government is constantly whispering. Can this country actually produce value? Here we're talking about the real stuff. The humming factories, the breakthroughs in tech, the sweat of the labor force, and the raw resources in the ground. If you aren't making anything, your money is just a ghost. After that, they ask, can it protect what it builds? This is where the rule of law comes in. It's about stability. It's about having institutions that don't crumble when the wind blows. People need to know that if they own a piece of your economy today, it won't be snatched away tomorrow. And lastly, the third and the big one. Can it keep its promises? Can it handle its debt? Can it pay the interest? Does it have the credibility to say, I owe you, and actually mean it? If the global market hears a yes, everyone wants your money. If they hear a maybe, they start to hesitate. But if they hear a no, they run. That's the secret to the foreign exchange market. Currencies don't trade against each other based on what's fair. They trade on confidence. It's a global popularity contest where the stakes are trillions of dollars. In every era, the most trusted currency becomes the yardstick, the one true ruler that everyone else uses to measure themselves. Today, that yardstick is the United States dollar. It isn't just because of the printing presses. It's because the world's oil is priced in it. Global debt is settled in it. And whether you're in Tokyo, Berlin, or Sao Paulo, global trade depends on it. The reality of our modern world is simple. Other currencies aren't really competing with the dollar. They're just orbiting it. Trust is a funny thing. We don't notice it until it's gone. It's the invisible glue holding every transaction, every paycheck, and every dream together. But trust is fragile. It's thinner than the paper your money is printed on. In 1971, the world changed while we were sleeping. There was no grand ceremony, no public referendum. There wasn't even a debate. On a quiet Sunday night in August, the U.S. government essentially severed the last physical cord between the dollar and reality. For decades, if you had a dollar, you technically had a claim to a sliver of gold sitting in a vault. Then, with the stroke of a pen, that tether was cut. No announcement of a new era, just a temporary suspension that became permanent. From that moment on, money stopped being a commodity. It became a pure promise. And the thing about promises? They're easy to make and even easier to print. When a government can print the solution to its problems, the temptation is infinite. Some countries handled that power with caution. They survived. But others? They treated the printing press like a magic wand. We've seen the same tragedy play out in Zimbabwe, in Argentina, and in Venezuela. It's a common misconception that these economies collapsed because the people suddenly got greedy, or you can say lazy. That's not what happened. They fell because the collective belief snapped. Imagine working for 40 years, saving every penny for a quiet retirement, only to watch the math stop working. Prices don't just go up, they sprint. They outrun your wages, they lap your savings. Your life's work evaporates not because you did something wrong, but because the promise you were holding was diluted into nothingness. Once the confidence is gone, once people realize the paper in their wallet is just paper, the game is over. You can pass all the laws you want. You can threaten people with jail time for not accepting the currency, but you can't legislate trust. Once trust leaves a currency, no power on earth can force it back into the room. People think a currency collapses like a building in a demolition. One big explosion and then it's gone. But that's not how it happens. Currencies don't die in an instant. They erode, they rust, they drift away. It starts quietly. So quietly, you might even think everything is fine. And the most interesting part, it usually begins with a problem that has absolutely nothing to do with finance. Maybe the factories stop humming. Maybe exports slow down because the world found a cheaper supplier. Maybe the government starts promising more than the country's heart can pump. The math starts to drift. The country is spending more than it's earning. It's a gap, a small one at first. To fill that gap, the government looks for a hero. They find it in the bond market. They borrow. Foreign investors step in, lured by the promise of interest. For a while, the illusion holds. Confidence is a powerful drug. As long as everyone believes the bill will be paid, the lights stay on. But debt isn't free. It's a mortgage on the future. And eventually the interest starts to eat the budget alive. Now, the government hits a fork in the road. They have three choices. They can raise taxes, but that loses elections. They can cut spending, but that causes riots in the streets. Or they can take the third path, the invisible one. They can create money. At first it feels like a miracle. The printing starts and nothing breaks. The markets barely flinch. People feel a sense of relief because the checks are in the mail. But there's a catch that every economist knows, and every politician tries to forget. You can print money, but you cannot print stuff. You can't print a factory. You can't print a breakthrough in technology. You can't print productivity. All you've done is hand out more tickets to a movie theater that only has 100 seats. Eventually someone is going to realize there isn't enough room for everyone. This is the questioning phase. This is when the smart money starts looking for the exit. They look at the debt, they look at the printing presses, and they ask the one question no government wants to answer. Is my wealth safe here? If the answer is maybe, the capital begins to leave. It starts as a trickle, a few hedge funds shifting assets to gold or foreign stocks. Then it becomes a flood. As the money leaves, the currency weakens. Suddenly that imported car or those foreign electronics cost 20% more. To stop the bleeding, the government raises interest rates. They try to make it expensive to leave, but all they do is make it impossible for local businesses to survive. The spiral begins to tighten. We've seen this movie before. Look at Venezuela. They had the largest oil reserves on the planet. They were the Saudi Arabia of the West. But when oil prices dipped, the government didn't tighten its belt. They just printed more believers to cover the difference. Inflation didn't just rise, it exploded. The currency lost its meaning. It wasn't just expensive, it was irrelevant. Imagine working a 40-hour week and realizing your paycheck can only buy a single carton of eggs. Savings that took decades to build vanished in months. People didn't stop using the believer because they were being unpatriotic. They stopped because they had to survive. When your money fails to represent the work you did today, you stop trusting tomorrow. Every collapse is different, but the ending is always the same. Debt leads to printing. Printing leads to inflation. Inflation leads to capital flight, and capital flight leads to collapse. When a currency is no longer a trusted promise and becomes a political tool, the market doesn't argue. It doesn't write a protest letter, it simply exits. Confidence is a fragile thing. It's built over centuries and destroyed in a season. Because once the trust is gone, the money isn't just weak, it unravels. We like to think of a country's wealth as something controlled by a dial, a knob that a central banker can just turn up or down whenever the vibes get a little shaky. We want to believe that a strong currency is born from a great speech, or a clever piece of legislation, or a bold new slogan. But that's a fantasy. Currencies don't get strong by accident, and they definitely don't get strong overnight. There is no switch to flip. No law that can force a person to believe in a piece of paper, because a currency is more than just money, it's a reflection of trust. And trust is built the same way it's destroyed, slowly, painfully, and through a hell of a lot of discipline. If you want to know what a dollar or a euro is actually worth, stop looking at the charts and start looking at the dirt. It starts with the real economy. A country has to actually make things the world wants to buy, not promises of future growth, not government subsidies that mask a failing industry, and definitely not catchy political slogans. Factories have to run, exports have to grow, productivity has to rise. You can't print your way into a global market. You have to earn your way into it. Then comes the hard part, the part that usually gets politicians fired: restraint. Budgets have to actually matter again. Debt has to be treated as a live wire, something dangerous, not something convenient to kick down the road. Printing more has to stop being the first solution to every minor tremor in the market. This is where it gets politically brutal. Strengthening a currency almost always means telling people they have to consume less today so they can survive tomorrow. It's about trading the dopamine hit of a spending spree for the long-term boringness of stability. History doesn't stutter, it repeats. Look at Germany after World War II. Total ruin. The currency hadn't just dipped, it had evaporated. Savings were worthless. People were literally bartering buttons and tobacco for food. But Germany didn't try to print its way out of the crater. They did something rare, something almost unheard of in modern politics. They rebuilt trust before they tried to rebuild growth. They brought in a new currency. They slashed government spending to the bone. They became obsessed, almost pathologically so, with price stability. They stopped looking for shortcuts and started looking at exports and manufacturing. It wasn't a miracle, it was a grind. Wages stayed low, people bought less. The recovery was agonizingly slow, but eventually the world noticed. Belief returned, and when belief returns, the money follows. The Deutsche Mark didn't become a titan because Germany printed less. It became a titan because Germany produced more. We saw the same pattern across the Pacific. After its post-war collapse, Japan didn't rely on currency tricks or devaluations. They built. They didn't just make things. They made the best things: electronics, automobiles, precision engineering. Their currency didn't gain strength because of a central bank decree. It gained strength because the Made in Japan label became a global gold standard for reliability. Here's the uncomfortable truth. A strong currency isn't a gift. It's an achievement. It's earned through years of boring, disciplined, and often unpopular policy. And that's exactly why so few countries ever manage to do it. Because building a strong currency means saying no far more often than you say yes. No to the easy money, no to the short-term poll numbers, no to buying a lifestyle today at the expense of your children's tomorrow. Weak currencies are easy. They're the path of least resistance. Strong currencies are expensive, politically, socially, and emotionally. And that is why most governments won't choose strength until the alternative becomes unbearable. So why do currencies have different values? Because money isn't equal. It never was. It reflects power, productivity, politics, and above all, belief. Your currency is a mirror. It reflects how the world sees your country and how your country treats its promises. Money is not just a piece of paper. It's confidence, compressed into numbers. And once you see that, you realize something unsettling. The global economy isn't fair. It isn't neutral. It's hierarchical. And currency value is the ranking system. At this point, you can ask a very reasonable question. If money is just belief, if currencies rise and fall on trust, why not simplify the whole system? Why not use one global currency, one unit of account? No exchange fees, no currency crises, no borders for your bank account. On paper, it's the ultimate elevator pitch for a unified world. But here's the thing. History already ran the experiment. We have the data. And the results? They're actually a warning. The closest we've ever come is the Eurozone. It was the gold standard of modern economic ambition. Multiple nations, one currency, one central bank. Imagine the meeting. You have Germany, Greece, Italy, and Spain, all using the same bills and coins. It sounds efficient. It sounds like progress. But there's a fatal flaw in the logic. A single currency assumes a single economy, and the world, real life, just doesn't work that way. Look at the players. On one side, you have Germany, a powerhouse of high-value exports, heavy industry, and massive trade surpluses. On the other, you have Greece, an economy built on tourism and services, often facing chronic deficits. Before the euro, these differences were manageable. They had a pressure valve. If Greece hit a rough patch, its currency would naturally weaken. Suddenly, a vacation in Athens became cheaper for the rest of the world. Greek exports became bargains. Money flowed back in, and the scales eventually tipped back toward balance. But inside a shared currency, that pressure valve is welded shut. When the crisis hit, Greece couldn't devalue its money to stay competitive. It couldn't print its way out of a hole. It couldn't even set its own interest rates. With no way for the money to bend, the people had to break. The pressure had nowhere to go except straight into the lives of citizens, leading to brutal austerity, skyrocketing unemployment, and deep political scars. The result wasn't a unified Europe. It was a fractured one. Now, take that local disaster and scale it to the entire planet. Imagine one interest rate for both Silicon Valley and rural Africa. one monetary policy for an industrial giant and a fragile, developing nation. A global currency wouldn't erase inequality, it would lock it in. It would create a permanent hierarchy where the strongest economies dictate the rules and the weakest are forced to absorb every shock. Without a national currency, a government loses its last line of defense. No shock absorbers, no independence, no escape hatch. In the end, that's the great irony of finance. Our current system is messy, it's loud, it's unfair, and it's constantly fluctuating. But those fluctuations are what keep the system alive. Currencies are like springs in a car. They bend, they adjust, and they take the hit so the passengers don't have to. A single global currency wouldn't bring us together. It would create a system so rigid, so brittle, that it could no longer adapt to the reality of human difference. And the problem with rigid systems? They don't bend, they don't give. When they fail, they shatter. So here's the real question. If money is just belief, what happens when the world stops believing? And which currencies will survive that moment? Comment below, because this conversation matters more than you think.